This is the part 4 of 5 video structures for GS4 Marathon 2026. In this, we are going to discuss probity and international ethics. That is unit number 8 and unit number 9. This is the fourth of 5 and it completes the heaviest part of the paper. Video 2 covered the character of the officer, what integrity, impartiality, and accountability actually mean, and how they differ. This video is about what happens when you stop relying on that character. Probity is integrity built into machinery so that the citizen's experience does not depend on the personal virtue of whoever is sitting at the desk this year. And then international ethics, which has been asked in section A in 8 of the last 11 papers, and which most preparation still treats as a footnote. Three things carry forward. The first thing is the design frame from video number 1, and this video needs it most. Name the gap, state the design principle, 4 to 6 components, each a mechanism, not an aspiration. Who owns it and reviews it, the condition under which it fails. The second one, the precision from video number 2, accountability is answerability plus justification plus consequence. Without the third is reporting. 3, 4 thinkers course from video number 2 do the work in the second half. Clausewitz, war subordinate to political purpose. Immanuel Kant, never merely as a means. Rawls, the wheel applied across borders. Sane, capabilities and comparative justice. A word and why the first unit here matters more than its a topic suggests. Code of ethics has been asked in 2 consecutive years. The only topic in 13 years to do that. And neither question asked what a code of ethics is. Both asked you to build one. That is a design question, and this frame is what answer it. We begin with the probity. What is the probity? And what is the probity in governance? What is the probity in governance? So, unit 7 was about the character of the officer. This unit is about what happens when you stop relying on it. That is the whole idea of probity, and it is worth saying plainly at the start. An honest individual, an honest individual cannot guarantee good governance because an honest individual is transferred, retires, or is one down. Probity is what you have when integrity has been built into the machinery, into disclosure requirements, audit trails, published timelines, appeal rights, so that the citizen's experience does not depend on the personal virtue of whoever happens to be sitting at the desk this year. A definition worth having ready. What is that? Probity is adherence. Probity is adherence to ethical principle in public life, going beyond mere compliance with the law and made durable by institutional practice. Ethics tells the individual what to do. Probity is the arrangement that makes it likely they will. And the philosophical basis which answers a whole family of questions in one line. Legal authority. gives an institutional legal authority, gives an institution power. Only ethical conduct gives it legitimacy. A government compel without being trusted. Legal authority gives an institution power. Only ethical conduct gives its legitimacy. A government can compel without being trusted, but it cannot govern for long that way. And the difference between the two is exactly what this unit is about. The code of ethics, and why this is the strongest signal in the paper for 2026. Start with a fact about the recent papers. In 2024, UPSC asked, there is a code of conduct already in operation, whereas a code of ethics is not yet put in place. Suggest a suitable model to maintain integrity, probity, and transparency into governance. In 2025, it asked, for an ethical work culture, there must be a code of ethics in every organization to ensure a value based, compliance based work culture. What suitable measures would you adopt in your workplace? 2 consecutive years, no other topic in 13 years has been asked in back to back papers. Not conflict of interest, not constitutional morality, not probity itself. If you are budgeting revision time by likelihood, this is where it goes. Now read the two stems again because there is a trap in them. Neither asks what a code of ethics is, neither asks how it differs from a code of conduct. Both ask you to build one. What is that? Most preparation covers the distinction which answers the 2018 question and neither of these. This is a design question, and design questions have a different shape. The distinction, state it once quickly and move on. It answers 2018 and neither of the new ones. What is the code of ethics? Code of ethics versus code of conduct. Code of ethics. Code of ethics. What is the nature of code of ethics? Broad values and commitments. Comes to code of conduct, specific behavioral rules. And what should be guide us? Comes to code of ethics. Comes to code of conduct, what is required or forbidden. What is the character in code of ethics? Aspirational and self-regulating. Comes to code of conduct, mandatory, enforceable. Comes to the example as far as code of ethics is concerned, act with integrity and impartiality. Comes to code of conduct, do not accept gifts above the limit. So India has the code of conduct, the conduct rules for the services, and no notified code of ethics for the civil services. That is precisely the gap the 2024 question hands you. And the sentence that ends the mark is this: a code of conduct can be complied with in fully. A code of conduct can be complied with in full by a person of no integrity, and that is not a defect in its drafting but the limit of its form. So rules can only forbid identifiable acts, they cannot require a disposition. And there is a sharper way to state the gap than and there is a sharper way to state the gap state the gap that we do not have one. A sharper way to state the gap then we do not have one, because we have tried twice. A code of ethics for the public services was prepared in 1997 as part of an action plan on responsive government, considered and never adopted. The draft Public Service Bill of 2007 followed 2007 followed and remains under consideration to this day. So India has drafted a code of ethics twice in 30 years and adopted neither, which tells you the obstacle is not drafting, which tells you the obstacle is not drafting. That single sentence is worth more in an answer than a list of any bills values. One more thing to name, because it gives you model and authoritative spine. The second Administrative Reforms Commission proposed ethical guidance at three descending levels. At an apex, three descending levels. At an apex, a short statement of values and ethical standards. Then below it, the broad principles that should govern conduct, the code of ethics proper, and below that a specific code of conduct listing acceptable and unacceptable actions unambiguously. So naming that three level structure shows you know the recommendations rather than the topic, and the six components below sit inside its middle layer. So the commission drew on the seven principles of public life articulated by the Nolan Committee and recommended the public service values be given a statutory basis. A statutory basis. What is that model? The model, six components, every on a mechanism, every one of them a mechanism. The standard failure here is an aspiration list. Ensure transparency, promote accountability, strengthen ethical values. Those are not measures, they are the problem restated in a hopeful tone. Test every component you write against one question. Could a department actually this on Monday morning? The first thing, a preamble of purpose. A preamble of purpose. First component. Two or three sentences on why the service exists. Everything below is justified by reference to it, which is what stops the code becoming a list of PTs. Then second component, few values defined as behavior, 5 or 6, not 15, each written as an observable act rather than an adjective, records the reason when departing from a recommendation. Not is transparent. A value nobody can observe is a value nobody can be held to. So third component, work dilemmas. A code that contains no hard case is decoration. A code that contains no hard case is decoration. It must show at least one situation where two of its own values collide and state how the service expects that resolved. This is the component that distinguishes a real code from a poster. The fourth component, that is disclosure, a disclosure architecture. What is the disclosure architecture? Annual conflict of interest declarations, a gift and hospitality register, a recusal procedure, cooling off before post retirement, employment in a regulated sector. Disclosure is what converts a value into a checkable fact. So, fifth component, an advisory channel. An advisory channel separate from the punitive one. Somewhere an officer can ask before acting confidently without the question itself becoming a vigilance record. This is the component Indian practice most conspicuously lacks, and naming it is what separates a considered answer from a generic one. At present, an officer in doubt has two options. First option is guess or ask the person who will later judge him. Then final component is ownership and review. Drafted what the service rather than handed down. Formally adopted, reviewed on a fixed cycle with a named custodian. A code nobody helped write is a circular. A code nobody helped write is a circular. So value based and compliance based, the 2025 framing. Compliance asks what, is this permitted? Value asks what, is this right? The question does not offer them as alternatives, and neither should you. It asks for both, and the relationship between them is the answer. Compliance is the floor, values are the ceiling. And compliance only culture is not merely incomplete, it actively harmful it actively harmful it is actively harmful. It produces the defensive literal rule following that the same 2024 paper complained about one question earlier: mindless addiction to farm, ignoring the substance. Compliance without values manufactures exactly that officer, and then the system blames him for lacking judgment it trained out of him. The limit to close on a code changes behavior only where seniors are visibly bound by it, where the code applies downward and exemption flows upward. It teaches cynicism faster than having no code at all, because now the hypocrisy is documented. The reusable frame and its answers, five more parts from 2024 and 2025 alone. Have to name the gap, then state the design principle, then 4 to 6 components, each a mechanism, then say who owns it and who reviews it, then close on the condition under which it fails. Then comes to transparency and the RTI question. Transparency is openness about how a decision was made, how money was spent, and on what basis a person was preferred. Its value is not that it catches wrongdoing, it usually does not, but that the knowledge of visible, but does that the knowledge of visibility changes the decision before it is made. So, what is the worked example here? The 2018 RTI question: the Right to Information Act is not all about citizens' empowerment alone. It essentially redefines the concept of accountability. Discuss. The mistake is a generic answer about RTI being good. The question has a hinge. What is that? Redefines. And the whole answer must turn on it. Empowerment is the half of the empowerment is the half the question concedes. Redefinition is the half it wants. So redefinition is the half it wants. So what did accountability mean before? It ran upward and periodically. It ran upward and periodically. The officer answered to the senior, the government answered to the legislature, and the voter answered nothing until the next election. Every channel was internal, hierarchical, and intermittent. What RTI changed? Name three shifts. What are the shifts? From periodic to continuous. The first shift: accountability now operates between elections on May given Tuesday. From hierarchical to citizen facing. The person entitled to an explanation is no longer only your superior, and from secrecy as a default to disclosure as default, which reverses the presumption the Official Secrets Act had built, and that reversal is why the 2019 question about the two state use conflicting is really the same question. Then balance it, or the answer reads as cheerleading. The honest costs what? The honest costs defensive decision making by officers who fear a query more than a bad outcome. The volume of frivolous application and the risk to those who use the act against powerful local interests. These are real, and none of them is argument against the act. They are arguments for protecting requesters and for a decision culture that is not afraid of being explained. So RTA converted the principle of accountability into a citizen's enforceable right. That is the definition, and that is why is a probity instrument and not merely transparency one. So what are the three audits? Social audit. Ask one no auditor can answer from a in this audit financial performance social. Comes to financial, what ask the money spent as sanctioned, what is the limit, entirely satisfiable by a fraud with good paperwork. Comes to performance, what is spent well and its limit, still a file based exercise conducted by professional. Come to social, did it actually reach the person named in the record, what its limits, only the people in that record can answer in public in front of each other. So what is the citizens charter and why most of them failed? A citizen charter states what service a citizen may expect, in what time, from whom, and what recourse exists if it does not arrive. The principles are worth naming: publication of standards, quality, choice, where possible, courtesy, value for money, and redress when the standard is missed. The examinable point is why the Indian experience has largely disappointed, and the answer is precise. Most charters were drafted internally without consulting the citizens they bound, set standards that were not measured, and decisively attached no consequence to breach. A promise with no remedy is a brochure. Any answer recommending charter should say what makes one work, that is, standards set with users, published performance against them, and a named accountable officer, and a defined remedy, and a social audit. Social audit. What is the social audit? The question no other audit can answer. This was asked in 2021 and it is missing from the most preparation. So learn it properly. The cleanest way in is to compare three questions. What are those three questions? First one, financial audit asks, was the money spent as sanctioned? It examines vouchers, sanctions accounts. It can be entirely satisfied by a fraud with good paperwork. This is all belongs to financial audit. Then comes to performance audit. What is the performance audit? Performance audit asks what, was it spent well? It examines outcomes against objectives. It is still file. It is still a file-based exercise conducted by professional. Then comes to social audit. Social audit. Social audit asks the third question. What is the third question? And no auditor can answer it from a file. Did it actually reach the person named in the record? The can the question can only be answered by the people whose names are in the record in public. in front of each other, which is why social audit is conducted as a public hearing, as not as a report. It moves accountability downward, converts the citizen from the object of a scheme into the auditor. Its ethical significance is what? What is the ethical significance? It moves accountability downward to the beneficiary, and it converts the citizen from the object of a scheme into its auditor. It is the strongest available answer to the gap between disbursement figures and delivery. What is its honest limit? Its honest limits, which you should state, it works only where the auditing unit is independent of the implementing agency, where the people testifying are protected from retaliation by those they name, and where findings lead to recovery and action rather than a filed report. Where any those falls, where any those fails, social audit becomes theater, and a captured social audit is worse than none, because it it manufactures a certificate. One delivery instruction on this section argues social audit from its design logic. The three questions and the three conditions and do not name statutes, rules, or institutional arrangements. The argument is complete without them, and every one of the specifics here is the kind of detail that moves. We discussed citizen charters and why most failed. Asked in 2019, the examinable point was failure, not the principle. What they disappointed? Citizen charters drafted internally without consulting the citizen they bound, and standards set but never measured. Without measuring the standards they will set, they use it to set no consequence attached to breach. And what makes one work? Standard set with users, published performance against them, a named accountable officer, a defined remedy when a standard is missed. A promise with no remedy is a brochure. I already told you. Any answer recommending charters has to say what makes one bind. So, what are the public funds? What are the failures? Two different failures. Public funds, utilization and underutilization leakage. Utilization, underutilization, leakage. Asked in 2019 as under and misutilization, and again in 2025 as accountability for leakages. Two different failures, and the candidates routinely blur them. Underutilization. Underutilization is money allocated and not spent. Late releases, absent technical sanction, no implementation capacity at the last mile, or fear of audit producing paralysis, etc. The ethical content is not obvious until you name it. An unspent allocation is a service the citizen was promised and did not receive. And the fact that nobody stole it does not make the citizen whole. Then comes to misutilization. What is misutilization? Misutilization and leakage is money spent on the wrong thing, the wrong person, or nobody at all. Diversion between heads goes to beneficiaries, payment without work, inflated procurement. These measures as mechanisms, direct transfers to the beneficiaries to remove intermediaries, public disclosure of works, muster rolls and payments, concurrent rather than post facto audit, reconciliation between sanction, work done and payment made, social audit as above, and a real consequence for the drawing and dispersing officer who certifies falsely. And the line to close on this: every rupee here belongs to someone who has less than you do. Misuse of it is not a financial irregularity, but a transfer of resources away from the person the state exists to serve. Then comes to corruption. What is the corruption? Beyond the obvious, the 2014 question in this sharp one, it is often said poverty leads to corruption, yet affluent and powerful people are corrupt in a far larger scale. What causes? What causes it? Any answer resting on need alone fails immediately on that observation. The most useful diagnostic is structural. Corruption flourishes where monopoly and discretion meet weak accountability. A person who alone can grant something on criteria nobody else can check, and is unlikely to be asked to explain, will be offered money regardless of whether they are poor. So I will repeat it again. The most useful diagnostic is structural. Corruption flourishes where monopoly and discretion meet weak accountability. A person who alone can grant something, who decides on criteria nobody else can check, and who is unlikely to be asked to explain, will be offered money, and the offer will keep coming regardless of whether they are poor. So that formulation is useful because each of its three terms suggests a remedy. What is the remedy here? Break the monopoly, break the monopoly, structure the discretion, strengthen the accountability, strengthen the accountability. Any answer resting on need alone fails immediately on the question's own observation. And the non-structural causes, honestly, the collapse of social disapproval, so that corruption becomes an ordinary cost rather than disgrace. The expense of politics, low probability and long delayment in punishment, which makes the expected cost small, and rules so numerous that everyone is technically in breach, which converts enforcement itself into market, into a market. At the limit that belongs in every conclusion here, technically reduces the occasion for corruption by removing discretionary choke points and creating records. It does not manufacture integrity. Digitization moves corruption upstream to who writes the specifications, who configures the system, who holds the master data. A system is only as honest as the people who design it and the audit that watches them. And technology, AI, and the limits of automation. A repeat you should know about in 2021 UPSC asked whether the impact of digital technology as a reliable source of input for rational decision making is a debatable issue. In 2024, it asked whether the application of artificial intelligence as a dependable source for input for administrative rational decision making is a debatable issue. One noun changed 3 years apart. The same year, a case study in section B turned on AI as well. Prepare this properly. The frame four questions, and the answer is never a verdict on the technology in general. That is AI and automation. So, what are the four questions here? The first one is representativeness. Representativeness, is the data representative of the population being administered? A model trained on those who already reach the system learns nothing about those who never do, and then confidently reports that they do not exist. This is where algorithmic bias enters, not usually through malice, but through a data set that makes the reachable for the whole. Oh, this is regarding representativeness. Then comes to explainability. What is explainability? Can the decision be explained to the person it affects? An adverse administration decision that cannot be explained, is not valid, however accurate it is, because the citizen's right is to reasons and not merely to a correct outcome. This is the whole argument for explainable systems in government. Then comes to accountability. What is accountability? Who answers when it is wrong? The officer cannot delegate accountability to a model. The model has no conscience to appeal to, no career to risk, and cannot be transferred. Automation bias is the specific danger. Humans defer to a machine recommendation precisely where they are least equipped to check it. Comes to displacement of discretion. Does it remove judgment from exactly the cases where judgment was the point? The exceptional hardship applicant, the person whose circumstances the categories were not built to hold. That is displacement to discretion. Three examples worth carrying, one line each. A Soviet duty officer in 1983 who judged a satellite warning of incoming missiles to be a false alarm and did not escalate it, which it was the standing illustration that human judgment is not merely a slower version of the system. A criminal justice risk scoring tool in the United States shown to produce systematically different error rates by race, algorithm bias with consequences, and an Australian automated welfare debit recovery program that issued demands on averaged data with no human review and was eventually withdrawn. Automation without accountability. It scale against people least able to contest it. And an Indian illustration which is stronger for an Indian paper, benefit delivery conditioned on biometric authentication, where authentication fails, warn fingerprints on a manual laborer, poor connectivity, a mismatched record, the entitled person is denied, and the system records not an error but an absence of eligibility. The harm is precise and it generalizes. An automated system fails silently against the people least able to complain about it. Complain about it. The closing position, and this single sentence answers the question. What is that single answer? Single sentence. Automation is legitimate for triage, prioritization, and detection, and legitimate and illegitimate as the final word on adverse decision affecting an individual without human review. So keep the human in the loop. Keep the human in the loop where the decision takes something away from someone. So what is that? What is the line you have to write in your answers as far as AI automation is concerned? Automation is legitimate for triage, prioritization, and detection, and illegitimate as the final word on an adverse decision affecting an individual without human review. So that is why keep the human in the loop where decision takes something away from someone. So what is the Metis 2026 anchor here? Who carries the burden of knowing that the state works? In May 2026, the grievance department launched an AI voice assistant on CPGRAMS. Built with Bashini, a citizen can now lodge a grievance by speaking in their own language in ordinary words without knowing which ministry, department, category, or subcategory it belongs to. The system asks clarifying questions, identify the right authority, and files it there. The argument: the old system required a citizen to understand the government's internal structure before they could complain about it, a barrier that falls hardest on exactly the people with most complaint about. The reform shifts the burden, knowing how the state organized of the citizen and onto the state. For supporting argument, this supporting a 21-day disposal norm and appeals tier where a poor feedback rating lets a citizen appeal to the next authority. And index ranking departments on grievance performance and common service centers access to the non-digital. And the honest half here is which is the ethics rather than publicity. Ethics, which is ethics rather than publicity. Pendency remains substantial and disposable, and disposal is not resolution. A grievance closed with a formulaic reply counts the same as one actually solved, which is why the feedback and appeal layer matters more than the disposal figure. So you have to use the mechanism, not the number. How UPSC has asked this probity itself, the difficulties of practicing it and how to overcome them asked in 2014, measures for ensuring probity in government 2019, probity as essential to effective governance and socio-economic development 2023, and a 30-word note on probity in public life. This question asked in 2022. So transparency, RTI and secrecy. RTI, media and judicial activism being misused while officers grow afraid to decide. Asked in 2015. RTI, redefining accountability. Asked in 2018. The Official Secrets Act as an obstacle to RTI. Asked in 2019. Codes, charters, work cultures. Distinguish code of ethics from the code of conduct. Asked in 2018. Principles and importance of the citizens charter movement asked in 2019. Design a code of ethics 2024. Measures for a value based and compliance based work culture asked in 2025. Funds audit and corruption comes to this. Effectiveness of anti corruption measures and better strategies asked in 2015. Under and misutilization of public funds asked in 2019. Non-performance as corruption 2019. Social audit is an absolute must in every shape, including the judiciary, asked in 2021. Whistleblower protection 2022. Corruption as the failure of core values 2023. Accountability for leakages asked in 2025. Comes to the technology. Digital technology as an input to rational decision making asked in 2021. E-governance and whether it has helped beneficiaries asked in 2022. Challenges of digitalization as a short note asked in 2022. Artificial intelligence as an input to administrative decision making asked in 2024. The frames this unit feeds design a measure above everything, and this is the unit what the frame is most likely to be worth marks in 2026, because the code of ethics design question is the only topic in 13 years asked in back to back papers. Code of ethics. So the 2019 probity measures, the 2015 anti-corruption strategies, and the 2019 charter principles are take the same shape. Distinguish supplies one of its eight here. Code of ethics against code of conduct asked in 2018, and the quotation because the 2018 RTS stem, the 2021 social audit stem, and the 2024 AA stem all arrives as statements to be to be examined rather than topics to be explained. So you have to note in particular that the AI stem hands you the words debatable issue, which is the examiner telling you that a verdict either way will not score. One sentence to carry out this unit as far as closing is concerned. Ethics asks what an individual should do. Probity asks what an institution should be arranged to produce regardless who the individual is. The strongest answer in this block always ends the same way. What is that same way? Not with a better officer, but with a system in which a worse officer would still have done the right thing. So that is also closing move of every case study, which is what units 10 and 11 were built around. Then moving to the next unit, that is international ethics. International ethics. This unit exists because of a number. In most preparation material, international ethics is one sentence at the end of the public administration chapter. A list of arenas: climate, refugees, trade, technology. In the actual papers, it has been asked in section A 2023, 2024, and 2025. 3 consecutive years on top of 2015, 2017, 2020, 2021, and 2022. That is a 8 of the last 11 papers, 10 marks a year from a topic most candidates have not prepared at all. That is why it gets its own unit. So why these questions are hard and how most answers fail? Every question in this block does the same thing. It puts a general claim about how states actually behave against a moral expectation and asks you to hold both without collapsing into either. Answers fail in two predictable directions. The first predictable answer, first predictable direction. The first is a Naive moralism. Naive moralism. Nations should cooperate. Ethics must guide diplomacy. The world is one family. An examiner reads that as someone who has not thought about why states do not, in fact, behave that way. So the second is cynical realism. State pursues only their interest. So ethics has no place in international relations. That reads as someone who has decided the question is unanswerable and stopped. The mark is showing, the mark is in showing why neither is adequate and the bridge between them is a single idea worth stating explicitly in almost every answer here. Over a long enough horizon, being trusted is itself an interest. A state that breaks agreements gets worse terms next time. A donor that abandons a commitment finds its next offer discontinued. Reputation is not sentiment. Reputation is not sentiment. It is a capability that can be spent and can be lost. Once you say that, moral obligation and national interest stop being opposites and start being time horizons. What is the frame and four moves? What is the frame and four moves? The four moves. Every question, every question in this unit can be answered on this structure. What is that structure? The first one is consider the realist premise honestly. States pursue interests. There is no enforcement authority above them. Treaties bind only as far as the parties find it worthwhile. You have to say this in the first two lines, and the examiner knows you are not going to lecture. Answers that open by denying it lose denying it loss the reader immediately. Answers that open by denying it lost the reader immediately. Name the constraints that operate anyway. Reciprocity. You will need the same forbearance. You will need the same forbearance later. Reputation. The compounding cost of being seen to defect. Treaty obligation and the machinery that supports it. Domestic legitimacy. Governments answer to publics who do not always accept what is done in their name. And interdependence, which makes many defections self harming. Then third move, apply to the specific claim in the stem. This is where the marks are. To not write a general essay on ethics in international relations. Answer the sentence you were given. So close on the Indian position where it fits. State it is a position with reasons, not as praise. What is the international aid? International aid asked in 2023. International aid is an accepted form of helping resource challenged nations. International aid, consider the realist premise honestly, name the constraint that operate anyway, apply the specific claim in the stem, close on the Indian position where it fits. This is this discussed we so far. Then moving to international aid. This is asked in 2023. So international aid is an accepted form of helping resource challenged nations. Comment on ethics in contemporary international aid. The what doing the work is contemporary. The question is not whether helping is good, it is whether aid as currently practiced is help. The ethical issues. What are the ethical issues named precisely? First one, conditionality. Conditionality. Where assistance is tied to policy changes, the recipient did not choose. Assistance or leverage. Second one, tied aid, where the money must be spent on the donor's goods and services, which quietly returns a share of it. Then, donor driven priorities, where what gets funded is what donors public finds compelling rather than what the recipient most needs. And then comes to dependency, where a government financed from outside becomes accountable outward to donors rather than downward to its own citizens, which is the most serious harm and the least visible. And comes to volatility. The fourth one is volatility. The volatility, aid promised and then withdrawn for reasons internal to the donor, leaves a half-built system worse than one. The framing that lifts the answer is aid charity or restitution? Is part of the gap between nations was produced by extraction, then transfers are not generosity but repayment. And the moral vocabulary changes completely. A debitor does not get gratitude for paying and does not get to attach conditions to this payment. You do not have to adapt that view to deploy it. You have to show you know the question exists and the counterweight so the answer stays balanced. A donor accountable to its own taxpayers has a legitimate interest in knowing the money was used as intended. So some conditionality is not dominate. So some conditionality is not domination but stewardship. The ethical line falls between conditions about use and conditions about policy. So this is regarding international aid asked in 2023. In this we discussed conditionality, tied aid, dependency, and volatility. Dependency is what most serious harm and least visible, and the counterweight is what answer to be balanced. A donor accountable to own its taxpayers has a legitimate interest. So ethical line falls between conditions about use and conditions about policy. What is the frame lifting answer? If part of the gap between nations was produced by extraction, then transfers are not generosity but repayment. And a debtor does not get gratitude for paying and does not attach conditions to the payment. The moral vocabulary changes completely depending on which the two assumes naming the choice exists. What separates considered answer from a description of aid. Comes to the next one, the arms trade asked in 2024. Notice what the stem actually alleges here, the allegation and the honest counter. The 2024 STEM is unusually pointed. The major weapon industry, the major weapon industries of developed nations are adversely influencing the continuation of number of wars for their own self-interest. And what are the ethical considerations of powerful nations in stopping ongoing conflicts? So notice what it is actually alleging, not that arms are sold, but that an industry has acquired a commercial interest in the duration of conflict. That is precisely the failure model, the failure mode Clausewitz describes, and Unit 6 gives you the core. War is not an autonomous activity. It is an instrument of policy and must remain subordinate to the political object. When the instrument develops an interest its own use, the subordination has failed. Naming that link is the strongest single move available in this answer. So the obligation of powerful states as mechanisms rather than sentiments, end-use verification and monitoring rather than sale and forget, restraint or suspension of supply where there is a serious risk of atrocity, using leverage over clients to bring them to negotiation rather than only to sustain them. Funding risk reconstruction and not only munitions, and transparency is transfers, since secrecy is what allows the interest to operate unexamined. What is the honest counter? And the honest counter you must include is a state facing invasion has a right of self defense and therefore a right to acquire the means of it. A blanket prohibition on supply disarms the victim faster than the aggressor. So because aggressors usually manufacture their own, the ethical questions is not whether arms move, but on what condition, to whom, and with what monitoring. So war diplomacy and just war tradition asked in 2025 2022. 2025 gives you Clausewitz. War as a continuation of policy of other means, printed as a diplomacy by other means. 2022 asked directly about the ethical issues in launching a war and in continuing it. The tradition to have ready is just a war. Just war, and five words carry most of it. Just war, three stages, most answers omit the third. This asked in 2022 directly, then 2025 through Clausewitz. Before the war, before the war, just add bellum. A just cause, a just cause usually defends against aggression, right authority, meaning a legitimate decision marker rather than a function, right intention, so that just cause is not pretext for an unrelated aim, last resort, after other means are genuinely exhausted, proportionality, so the expected harm does not exceed the wrong being remedied, and a reasonable prospect of success, because a hopeless war spends lives for nothing. During the war, Jessin Bello, discrimination between combatants and civilians and proportionality in the means used, these bind regardless of whether your cause was just. A just cause does not license any method. After the war, just post bellum, reconstruction, accountability for crimes on both sides, and a settlement that does not itself become the cause of the next war. This third stage is the one most answers omit and the most distinguishes them. So you have to add the sanctions question because it recurs. Comprehensive sanctions fall hardest on a civilian population that did not choose the policy and cannot change it, while the leadership is insulated. Targeted measures against decision makers and their assets are the ethically preferable instrument. For exactly that reason, any answer recommending sanctions should say which kind. Then refugees and non-refoulement. asked 2021. Non-refoulement. Non-refoulement asked in 2021. The principle is narrow and strong. A person should not be returned to a country where they face persecution. It is narrow because it does not require a state to admit everyone. It requires it not to send someone back to danger. The tension is the question sets is sovereignty and security against the duty to the persecuted. And the honest position acknowledges both. A state has a real interest in knowing who crosses its border and a real duty to those feeling harm. The resolution is procedural rather than absolute. Screen register separate combatants from civilians, give temporary protection while status is determined, and do not return anyone until you know what you are returning to them. So comes to the Indian position. The stated structure rather than verdict. India is not a party to the 1951 Refugee Convention or its 1967 protocol and has no dedicated national refugee law. It has a party to the revised Bangkok Principles, a regional instrument in the absence of refugee status or statute. Entry and stay are governed by general foreigners legislation, which was not written with refugees in mind and does not distinguish a person fleeing persecution from any other foreign national without visa. Status determination runs on a dual track. The UN Refugee Agency determines status for asylum seekers for non-neighboring countries and from Myanmar, while other groups are handled administratively by the government. And India has, across its history, hosted very large refugee populations like Tibetans, Bangladeshis in 1971, Sri Lankan, Tamils, Afghans. Now, the ethical point here is, and this is one that makes this a GS4 answer rather than GS21, where there is no codified standard, protection becomes discretionary. And that is exactly the pair from Unit 7. Discretion is judgment inside a power that the rule confers for stable reasons. Discretion is judgment inside a power the rule confers for stable reasons, where no rule confers it and no reasons are recorded. The same decision is arbitrary. However, humanative outcome happened to be present the competing readings honestly. The absence of statute is defended as flexibility, allowing India to respond to each situation on its merits without a binding template, and criticized as inconsistency since the same facts can produce different outcomes for different groups with no stated basis for the differences. So both readings describe the same architecture. So give the examiner both rather than picking one. So this is present honestly and both describe the same structure. You have to give the examiner both rather than picking one. So what is the carry forward here? What is the carry forward? The 2025 case study, in which a divisional commissioner faces 250 people at the border, including the armed soldiers in uniform. In this principle, turned into an administrative decision at midnight. That is Unit 11 work fully. And then comes to climate, the ethics beneath the negotiation. The ethics begin beneath the negotiation, not asked as standard alone yet, but it sits inside the 2024 global warming question and behind every development versus environment case. So the governing principle in the negotiations is common but differentiated responsibility and respect capabilities. And the ethics under it are worth stating in one line each. First one, historical responsibility, per capita against absolute capability, international justice. Then first we are moving to historical responsibility. The stock of carbon in the atmosphere was placed there over 2 centuries. So largely by countries that are now wealthy because of it. Judging by current annual emissions alone asks late arrival to pay for the party. Then per capita against absolute. A country can be large total emitter and a small per person one. So which number you use is not a technical choice here. It is normal. It is moral one about whether the unit of concern is the state or the human being. Then comes to capability. Obligation tracks ability to act. A country with the means decarbonize and the alternatives to handovers more than one still building basic energy access. That is a capability. Then comes to intergenerational justice, the strongest ethical frame available here, and the one Rawls wheel handles best. You are choosing a policy without knowing which generation you will be born into. So the 2025 hybrid, the national security against environmental clearances. 2025 asked keeping national security in mind about the ethical dilemmas in controversies over environmental clearance for development projects in ecologically sensitive border areas. So this one is worth working because it belongs to two units at once and because the obvious answers are both wrong. So this is 2025 hybrid question, that is security against environmental clearance. Ecologically sensitive border areas, both obvious answer wrongs. What are the two wrong moves and the move that resolve it? The two wrong moves: treating the environmental objection as obstruction to be overridden, or treating the security claim as a pretext to be discounted. Both claims are genuine. Border infrastructure is a real security necessity. Fragile mountain ecology is real constraint, and in many border regions it is also the water source for population far downstream. Far downstream. So the move that resolves it water security itself depends on ecological stability. A road that triggers the landslide which destroys it has not served the security purpose it was built for. So large scale ecological failure in border region produce displacement and instability, which is a security problem by any definition. The two claims are not simply opposed. One is a partial and one is a partly a condition of the other. So then mechanisms. What are those mechanisms? Strategic need certification. Strategic need certification at level high enough to be answerable rather than a blanket exemption for a whole category. Genuine alternative alignment assessment, slope stability and cumulative impact assessed across a region rather than project by project. Since it is the aggregate that fails, restoration obligations attached to the sanction and a time bound review of any exemption granted. And the ethical principle here is to close on, which generalizes well beyond this question. Expansion, a genuine exception is narrow, reasoned, and reviewable. A standing exemption is not an exemption. A standing exemption is not an exception. It is a repeal that avoided the argument. Comes to Indian position, stated as a position, India part. The examiner is asking or testing whether you understand a tradition, not whether you approve of it. Almost every question in this unit invites a closing paragraph on where India stands. So state it accurately and without cheerleading. The examiner is testing whether you understand a foreign policy tradition, not whether you approve it. In this water, the principles, the practice, the norms. So the stated principles: strategic autonomy, Strategic autonomy with its lineage is in non-alignment. The claim that a state may take positions issues by issue rather than any block. Panchashil, the five principles of peaceful coexistence, mutual respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, non-aggression, non-interference in internal affairs, equality and mutual benefit, and peaceful coexistence, and Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam as a civilization framing India has invoked for global responsibility. The practical forms, development partnership rather than the donor model, demand driven projects without policy conditionality, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief in the neighbor, medical and vaccine supply, and advocacy for the global south in multilateral forums, including on climate finance and the reform of international relations. And the norms that marks as a mature answer, principled autonomy, interest driven hedging, principled autonomy and interest driven hedging can look identical from the outside. A state that declines to take sides may be acting on a considerable principle of non-alignment or maybe preserving relationships with the both parties, and observes what observes will disagree about which, acknowledging that ambiguity is not criticism, it is the recognition that in international ethics motive is rarely visible and therefore rarely provable. Present the competing readings rather than asserting one. Thinkers for this unit are first one, Clausewitz, war subordinate to political purpose, a war that has lost its objection, object to has lost its justification. The 2025 question and the diagnosis of the 2024 one. How UPSC asked this. 2015, bilateral relations. Bilateral relations governed by Bilateral relations governed by national interest alone led to conflict. How can ethical considerations help resolve such tensions? 2017 asked strength, peace, and security as the pillars of international relations elucidate. And 2020 question, the will the will to power exists but can be tamed and guided by rationality and moral duty. Examine the context of international relations. And 2021 asked refugees should not be turned back to a country where they would face persecution. Examine the ethical dimension being violated by a nation claiming to be democratic and open. The 2022 question asked the ethical issues crucial to launching a war and to its continuation. Then 2023, ethics in contemporary international aid. 2024 question, weapon industries and the continuation of wars and the ethical considerations of powerful nations in stopping ongoing conflicts. Then 2025 asked Clausewitz on war and diplomacy and national security against environment clearance in ecologically sensitive border areas. So you have to read the list downwards and the trend is unmistakable. So from abstract questions about whether ethics has a place in international relations at all, towards specific contemporary and increasingly uncomfortable ones. So you have to prepare for the specific. So the frames this unit feeds the quotation almost exclusively. Look back at the list 2015, 17, 20, 21, and 2025 all arrive as a statement to be examined rather than a topic to be explained. And the four moves above are simply the quotation frame with the realist premise conceded first. What is equally worth knowing is what this block has never produced, not one distinguished question and not one enumerate and justify in 11 years. So do not rehearse those here. Prepare to decode a sentence about how states behave and to argue obligations as mechanisms. which is what 2021 asked for, and what the decision and what the design frame supplies. As far as closing is concerned, the single most useful thing to carry out of this unit is the bridge. You are never asked to choose between national interest and moral obligation, and any answer that does has misread the question. You are asked to show where they diverge, where they converge, and what an actor with power owes when they diverge, which is almost always restraint, transparency about what being done, and a willingness to be held to the same standard being demanded for others. So section B is where every principle in this marathon is finally asked, and the only question that matters, what would you do and why. Unit 10 and 11 are the half of the paper in this. This is the video number 4. We are going to complete. You are never asked to choose between national interest and moral obligation. You are asked whether where they diverge, where they converge, and what an actor with power owes when they diverge. So the almost always restraints, transparency, and willingness to be held to the standard being demanded of others. Then we are moving to next chapters. Remaining the chapters we are going to discuss in the next video. That is the final video of GS4 marathon, the ethics for 2026 mains.